This podcast is brought to you by the American Enterprise Institute.
If you like what you hear, please subscribe, rate, review, and share.
Thanks for listening. Here's our show.
What in the hell's going on?
What the hell is going on?
What the hell is going on?
I don't know what the hell he's talking about.
You don't have to know what the hell is on it.
What the hell's the matter with these guys?
We don't know what's going on.
What the hell's going on?
Who in God's name knows what it's all about?
Hi, I'm Danielle Pletka.
And I'm Marc Thiessen.
Welcome to our podcast, What the Hell is Going On? Mark, what the hell is going on? And where the hell are you?
Where the hell I am is in the city of Chicago with the Democratic National Convention. And can I tell you, we are not in Milwaukee anymore, let me tell you.
I can only imagine.
We were just talking off air before we started. Planned Parenthood is here with a mobile abortion clinic, and they are offering on-site abortions for free to all DNC participants and vasectomies as well, in case you are of that side of the confused gender scale that they follow here. So this is quite a different atmosphere from the Republican convention a few weeks ago.
I got to say, obviously, conventions are places where parties and attendees make asses of themselves, whether they are Republicans or Democrats. But that's a little over the top for my taste.
Even you, Dany.
Yeah. Even me.
They've crossed a line, even for you.
I find that off-putting. Yes. So we should recap a little bit, because for the month of August, we've had this amazing series, which is, What the Hell Should I Read? We did it last summer, and we loved it. Our listeners loved it. And so we were really happy to be able to talk to some of our absolute favorite authors. But as with everything these days, politics intrudes. You're at the Democratic National Convention. We have had so much happening. Joe Biden is out. Donald Trump is down. And Kamala Harris is a woman who isn't wacky. She isn't weird. She's full of joy. I feel like I'm living in the Twilight Zone.
And, it's so funny. Somebody tweeted out all the headlines from all the corporate media that include, like, Harris campaigning on a platform of joy. It's funny. We're now on day one of the Democratic Convention, right? If you go to the Harris-Walz campaign website, there is not an issues page. There's not a page where they've laid out their agenda for healthcare or education, they haven't even bothered to steal the Biden. And I don't think the Biden campaign had one either, obviously. And I just was remembering that in 2000, George W. Bush gave so many speeches, detailed policy speeches. And I say this as a speechwriter who remembers when candidates did this. Laying out, went to VMI and gave a speech laying out his defense agenda. He gave a speech laying out his education agenda. So many of them, I think there were like 15, that they were published in a book called Keeping America's Promise. And at the end of the Bush administration, I had edited a book called A Charge Kept, where we went through that first book of campaign promises and detailed how we had kept them. And today, Kamala Harris she gave a 15-minute economic speech that basically was plagiarized from Hugo Chavez. And that's been the extent of her policy proposals. And, I'm just stunned at the lack of seriousness that we see here.
Well, look, I completely understand the Democrats. They have actually managed to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. They have managed to turn around the race so that their candidate is now ahead in the national polls. Not by a lot, but certainly has taken back the lead that Donald Trump had at the time of the Republican convention. And she is, as many people have said already, she is mimicking the Joe Biden campaign of 2020. She is hiding in the ideological basement, and she's doing a great job of it. And the bottom line is that people are eating it up. There's nothing right now that is going to make that woman say more of substance, because the first substantive Hugo Chavez speech she gave, she got the crap kicked out of her by Everybody.
By the Washington Post editorial
Yes.
board, not by me in the Washington Post, though I kicked the crap out of it too, but by my liberal editors at the Washington Post, more gently kicked the crap out of it. And see, here's the thing that's happening, which is fascinating to me. So she is literally a stealth candidate because she didn't go through a Democratic primary, right? So in a Democratic primary, her fellow Democrats would have attacked her record. They would have gone through everything she had said. And some of them would have attacked her for not being far left enough, in which case she would have had to tack to the left to feed the base. Or some of the centrist candidates would have attacked her for being too far to the left and unelectable. And all of this stuff would have percolated, and she would have had to take positions, and she would have to lay out an agenda. And she just sort of inherited this campaign. I think her polling right now is a sugar high. People are tacking to her because she's not Joe Biden. And they've got a young, not lifeless, not Weekend at Bernie's nominee who seems nice and attractive, and because she's on a teleprompter, articulate, and so she doesn't want to screw it up. And so she's not saying anything. And she thinks that she can get through 3 months, I think we're at 97 days as we record this, of just doing that. And maybe she can. It's entirely
Maybe
possible.
she can. It's freaking the hell out of Donald Trump, I'll tell you that.
Well, we start voting in 3 weeks. The early voting
God,
starts
no.
in 3 weeks. 3 weeks from now.
Save me. Save me. I hate this so much. All right, Mark, I want to talk to you about something serious. You and I can be serious. Donald Trump can talk about Kamala's color and Kamala's drinking habits and Kamala's personality all he wants. It's time to talk a little bit of substance because you had a really great piece, and we're going to do this as a What the Hell Extra where we really talk in depth
What the
about
hell did I
one
write
of
this
our
week?
pieces. What the hell did you write this week, Mark? So you wrote a piece in your post column that I really like, and I think our listeners will like it too because it actually is data heavy. This is a piece entitled "The 2 Data Points That Explain Why Voters Hate the Biden-Harris Economy." Go for it.
All right, so we'll read the piece and then we'll talk about it. And to his credit, this is something that Donald Trump has been saying on the campaign trail. I've just got the receipts here. All right, here we go. So Vice President Kamala Harris has a problem. Large majorities of Americans believe the economy is on the wrong track, and more say the Biden-Harris administration's policies have hurt their personal finances rather than helped, and that their personal economic situation is getting worse rather than better. That's clearly a major headwind for Harris's presidential hopes. Until now, her and President Joe Biden's response to these concerns has been to tell people, don't believe your lying eyes or pocketbooks. The economy is doing a lot better than you think. As the Trump campaign pointed out in a new ad, until recently, Harris has been giving speeches boasting that, quote, Bidenomics is working, unquote. That message failed miserably for good reason. It doesn't conform to the lived reality of most Americans. To understand why, consider this simple statistic. Over the past 3 years, Americans have gone from the highest level of household savings ever recorded to among the lowest levels. At the same time, they have accumulated the highest level of personal debt ever recorded. In the Biden-Harris administration's first year in office, the Federal Reserve of San Francisco reports that U.S. households were sitting on a record $2.1 trillion in excess savings, meaning additional savings built up during the pandemic recession above the pre-recession trend. Nevertheless, as president of the Senate, Harris cast the deciding vote to pass the catastrophically misnamed, quote, American Rescue Plan, unquote, with only Democratic votes. It was a reckless $1.9 trillion social spending bill that even former Treasury Secretary Lawrence Summers, who served in both the Clinton and Obama administrations and has appeared on our podcast, warned would set off inflationary pressures of a kind we have not seen in a generation. It did just that, unleashing the worst inflation in 4 decades. As inflation skyrocketed, Americans spent down their savings and racked up debt trying to keep up. And we've got the charts here. We'll link to the column. The Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco reports that American households were spending down their savings at an average rate of $70 billion a month since September 2021, which accelerated to $85 billion a month since last fall. By March of this year, they had fully depleted all the excess savings they had accumulated during the pandemic, and by June, their savings had dropped $372 billion below expected levels. Meanwhile, consumer debt has reached a record of $17.8 trillion. That is a $3.15 trillion increase since Biden and Harris took office. Credit card debt has surpassed $1.14 trillion for the first time, almost doubling on Biden and Harris's watch. Today, the average American is carrying $6,329 in credit card debt, an increase of $1,534 during this presidency. And total debt increased on Donald Trump's watch too, but more slowly and in a time of historically low interest rates. Because the Federal Reserve raised interest rates to fight inflation, Americans are paying the highest interest on that record debt in 23 years. The average credit card interest rate today is 24.92%, the highest level on record. So not only are many Americans' credit cards maxed out, their debt is compounding more quickly each month. A basket of groceries that cost $100 before Biden and Harris were elected now costs more than $125. And last year, more than 60% of Americans used credit card debt, payday loans, savings, and buy now, pay later options to pay for those groceries, according to a May report from the Urban Institute. Nearly 4 in 10 Americans have been charged a late fee in the past year because they could not pay their bills on time. Many also can't afford to buy a home because housing prices have skyrocketed and mortgage rates have more than doubled from 2.77% when Biden and Harris took office to 6.49% today. But renting offers little relief because residential rents have risen 22% in that same time. The costs of electricity and other utilities and home insurance and childcare have all shot up as well. As Trump put it in his interview with Elon Musk last week, 5 years ago, people were saving a lot of money. Today, they're using all their money and borrowing just to live. It's a horrible thing that's happening. He's right. And this reality puts Harris in a no-win situation. A new Financial Times University of Michigan poll finds that more than 60% of Americans say Harris should make major changes to Biden's economic policies. But as a sitting vice president, she can't disavow the economic policies she helped to preside over for the past 4 years. She wasn't just a passive bystander to Bidenomics, she was one of its architects, casting the tie-breaking votes that enabled the inflation-inducing spending that the Biden-Harris administration unleashed. So where does she differ from Biden? If she had won the 2020 election instead of Biden, there's a good reason to believe she would have tried to spend even more. During her campaign for the Democratic nomination, she proposed a mind-boggling $45.5 trillion in new spending, according to Manhattan Institute budget expert Brian Riedel. That is more than 10 times the $4.3 trillion in new spending she and Biden enacted. She also promised to ban fracking, which would have driven up gas and electricity prices even higher. So Harris can't defend the administration's record without appearing as hopelessly out of touch as Biden. She can't disown the disastrous economic policy she helped implement. And as a committed leftist who has endorsed the full democratic socialist agenda from the Green New Deal to Medicare for all, the only different course she can honestly offer is to spend more, which would make inflation even worse. On Friday, she did just that. She doubled down on socialism with a widely panned economic policy speech in which she deflected blame for inflation onto big business and proposed a federal ban on price gouging for groceries and other essential items. Federal price controls are a catastrophically bad idea that failed everywhere they have been tried, from the Soviet Union to the Nixon administration, and they would lead to Venezuelan-style shortages and even worse inflation. So is her proposed $25,000 in government subsidies for first-time homebuyers, which would cost a fortune and drive up already soaring housing prices. Her best new economic idea is her proposal to eliminate federal taxes on tips, despite the administration having created a new program last year to crack down on tip service industry workers. But that one she plagiarized without attribution from Trump. In all, Harris's proposals amount to almost $2 trillion in new government spending, virtually the same as the disastrous Biden-Harris American Rescue Plan that unleashed the inflation Americans are struggling with today in the first place. In other words, she has learned nothing from the economic policy failures of the Biden-Harris administration. That's the column.
The difficulties here are pretty straightforward. The problem for our coastal communities is that we don't see these things or feel these things in the same way that most Americans do. And notwithstanding Kamala Harris's belief that there are 220 million Americans, actually there are 320 million Americans, of which we, coastal elites, the people who make up the Congress and the Biden administration and the executives of Goldman Sachs, etc.
And the Democratic Party.
and the Democratic Party, they are not really representative of these kinds of people, and they don't understand their pain. To steal a horrible episode from poor old George H.W. Bush, don't actually know what a gallon of milk costs. And it costs an enormous amount of money. It's not just eggs, it's everything. And you understand why people can't face it. We have kids who live near us in Washington, D.C., and they're just normal people. They're not making astronomical 6 or 7 figure salaries, and they can't afford a new house because there isn't a new house to be had under $1 million anywhere within about 45 minutes of work. So, I mean, I don't understand how Kamala Harris sells herself to people on this front.
She sells herself the way Biden was trying to sell himself, which is, I'm not Donald Trump, I'm not a threat to democracy, and abortion, abortion, abortion. I mean, that's the campaign strategy. She can't separate herself, as I said in the column, because she was the key. She literally, so one of the stats that I found in digging through this, she has cast more tie-breaking votes than any vice president in American history. And that means that she cast the tie-breaking vote. A lot of those are on judges. A lot of those are on nominees. But a lot of those were for spending bills that were passed with Democrat-only votes. And so they own this. They own this spending. And so if you just spent the last 4 years unleashing, she doesn't understand where the inflation is coming from. She thinks it's price gouging. It's not price gouging. It's reckless government spending. And so what is their solution is more government spending. They literally haven't learned any lessons from the mistakes they made. Do they truly believe that this is price gouging? That like grocery stores, which have I think a 1.5% profit margin, are price gouging? No, they're not. This is things actually cost more when you spend more. And to double down and come up with a $25,000 government subsidy for home buyers? No. Bring the inflation down, which will bring the interest rates down, which will make the costs of housing more affordable. They literally are economic illiterates.
Right, but to be fair to them, that economic illiteracy is pervasive. This is the same party from which Elizabeth Warren also argued that it was greed that was driving inflation, when in fact, the most basic of economics lessons, and I assume that even as a Native American attending some of our nation's finest schools, she actually had to take an economics class. We understand that when too much money chases too few goods, that's what happens. Prices go up, and when the costs go up. And of course, we have to talk about the other factor as well, which we've talked about with so many of our own scholars and our guests, which is that when you insist that the minimum wage be twice what it is in some places, $15, $18, $20. The costs go up to the people who employ you, and they don't eat it. They pass it on to their consumers.
The dollar menu disappears at McDonald's.
But it's, look, I've spent, as our listeners know, I've spent a bunch of the summer in Europe, and let me tell you, we never spend for dinner what we spend for dinner in Washington, because the prices here are so much lower, because the costs are so much lower going in, because they're not being driven up by this insanity that we have at home. And, I hope that Donald Trump is able to make this case. I agree with you that he's finally started to make the case in his speeches after his 3-week period of distraction in which he talked about everything but substance. But they have to make this case if they're going to actually persuade people that they need to. First of all, if they elect Kamala Harris, they need a House and a Senate that's going to keep her in check. Because if things keep going her way, she's going to get a House and a Senate that goes along with her, and you and I know exactly where that's going to lead.
Yeah. So your solution is Italian-style fiscal restraint.
Yes, exactly. Well, you know something? That was a great touche.
But we could do worse than Giorgia Meloni. I agree.
We are going to do worse than Giorgia Meloni, if I may say so.
I would take Giorgia Meloni over Kamala Harris any day of the week. The other thing that I didn't get into in the piece, but is also when we had Gary Cohen on our podcast discuss, is that the border crisis is inflationary. We have allowed at least minimum 10 million people to cross illegally into this country. And there was the New York Post headline last week, the front page, I picked it up when I was up in Maine. You can get the New York Post up in Maine. The headline was, that the migrants have cost the city of New York taxpayers $5 billion. That is the equivalent of the entire police budget of the city of New York. I mean, that
Well,
is
luckily, they don't
insane.
need any police.
Yeah, it's not just the spending, the costs of feeding and housing and educating all these migrants. It's the fact that that's 10 million more people chasing goods and services, that the finite amount of goods and services in the country, which is raising the prices of all those goods and services. If you want to try and get a medium-priced hotel in New York, you can't. Because you know why? Because the government has bought up all the medium-priced and low-priced hotel rooms and given them away free to the migrants, which means that the price of all the other hotel rooms goes up. The same is true for food. The same is true for social services. Everything costs more. It probably is only a small fraction of the inflation, but when you combine it with all the other government spending, when you combine it with all the other the fiscal policies that are driving it up, it's a catastrophic hole that they have unleashed on this country.
No, listen, I agree with you. And what I was about to say was the number that drove it home to me was that 20% of hotel rooms in New York are being taken up by the city of New York in order to house illegal immigrants.
There you go.
That is 20%. It's just staggering.
Entire hotel shut down and taken up by migrants. You can walk by. I mean, when I go up to New York for Fox, and I walk around near Times Square, which is where Fox headquarters is, there are hotels. You walk by, and they're literally have a luxury hotels that are closed and just filled with migrants.
Well, folks, we're creeping into the last weeks of summer. Mark is doing what all of us don't want to do, which is attending the Democratic National Convention. I'm really looking forward to seeing him on Fox talking all about all of the good times he and the abortion van and the vasectomy van and all of the pro-Hamas demonstrators are going to be having over the next few days. I personally can't wait.
I'm enjoying it. And, unlike the RNC, nobody knows. When I walk around the United Center, nobody's come up to me yet for a selfie because nobody knows who the hell I am.
Well, Mark, if they did, it wouldn't be a selfie they were looking for, let me tell you. Anyway, take care, everybody. We'll see you soon.
Take care. Bye. Let us know what topics you'd like us to cover. You can get in touch with the show by emailing us at whatthehell@aei.org.
Or you can reach us on Twitter. I'm at @dpletka.
And I'm at Marc Thiessen. That's Mark with a C.
Please rate and review the podcast. If you like the show, please subscribe, share it, comment on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening to this.
Thanks for listening.